Hello. I have been doing a lot of analysis on various different openings and kind of some openings finding some improvements and sometimes proving that variations are not as bad as it mentioned in theory, and this has not been like a major openings but openings that a lot of mediocre players, and even on a stronger side, they play a lot. But now I want to present new chapter to you. New chapter is the number one opening in a chess theory, which is Sicilian, but we have done Sicilian, but never Najdorf. Now let's talk about the number one popular variation in modern theory, Najdorf variation of Sicilian. Okay, well, lately has been mixed evaluations of various positions and various continuations, sharp variations, quiet variations in Najdorf. But the latest, in my observation, came up the move that I was always fond of this move, and the move is there is Najdorf main position, e4 c5 knight f3 d6, d4 cd knight takes d4, knight f6 knight c3, a6. Move I'm talking about is h3. At first, h3 was played a number of years ago, I don't know, maybe over 30 years ago, actually over 40 years ago, by Fischer against Najdorf himself. Fischer won the game, very nicely won game, but with all due respect to Fischer, I have to admit here, I have to make a statement that Fischer didn't know much of a theory about this opening, about this variation. But what Fischer did, Fischer won the game of chess. He just outplayed Najdorf and he won, and he could have gone b3 and probably would have won as well. But well, after h3, I always liked this move, and if I ever had Najdorf in my games for last 40 years, I wasn't playing anything but h3. So I was very much pleased to see that lately it becomes more and more popular. So I did some very intensive analysis with Ripka of the main continuations, and a lot of good players, very strong players, played against h3 variation. Well, here there are only three moves three popular moves. I should say four, but knight c6 is maybe fourth, but I'm not that sure. The three moves are e6, e5, and b5. Now, let's analyze these variations, and every time there is three variations for black, three of them. Well, it doesn't matter. I don't think we should look at them in some particular order. So I would go with e6. Now, the choices and possible continuations I will be mostly discuss for black. black's choices, because I am trying to prove here that white has good advantage, and therefore with white we should play the moves that I would suggest. And it's not just my suggestion out of nowhere, it's after careful analysis, after observation of the games, based on games, and heavy, very heavy involvement of powerful Ripka. So after g4, the number one popular continuation is d5 in this case. And on d5, for a while it's been known that this move gives black fairly good game, because if white plays e5, after knight d7, e5 pawn is hanging, and h3 and g4 is totally out of place. Black has very good case of French defense, and black possibly has an advantage as well. The normal move is e takes d and knight takes d5. Well, I have to point to you that e takes d is not good, because after bishop g2 there will always be potential threat of g5 for white, and it's not gonna look good for black. So ed has not been played at all. Knight takes d5, and now knight e2. So here black has some choices. Well, but practically the only move that worth analyzing is the main move bishop b4 that was played in every game on a reasonably high level. And here white has two choices, bishop d2 and bishop g2. More popular was bishop d2, but I would recommend bishop g2, because popularity based on well, a lot of people prefer this move without having careful analysis of this continuation. Here, after knight e2 and bishop b4, instead of bishop d2, instead of last move bishop d2 that was suggested, we play bishop g2, and now the best move for black, castling, and castle for white. Now we shouldn't mind doubled pawns on c3 and at the same time going to the endgame. Well, let's look. Knight takes c3, knight takes c3. Actually, I had a game like this. My opponent played bishop takes c3, and after queen takes d8, rook takes d8 and bc, black's position is very, very difficult. For example, knight c6, rook b1. Black has a lot of dark square witnesses, and after bishop goes to e3 or f4, white is going to have absolutely dominating position. Knight a5 was played in my game, and now bishop f4, threatening bishop c7, and it's very bad position. After knight c4 that was played, rook b4, and black is practically lost here. Notice that we could have taken pawn on b7, but rook b4 is a better move. e5 was played, and after bishop g3, black absolutely collapsed. Knight d2 was played, rook d1. There is no knight f3 check, because bishop takes f3, and there is no good way to protect b7 pawn, and white bishops will tear black's position apart. So this is bad way to play for black. So what else is there? In this position, after knight takes c3 and knight takes c3, the best move that Rybka thinks the best move is queen c7, which also gives white some advantage. And here are two different ways to play. Rybka's recommendation is queen d4, which I like less than knight e4. Now, but that's the only case where I give you both moves for white. Normally I should recommend one, but they are so close. In my opinion, they both give an advantage, but which one gives you better advantage? Now, Rybka says that queen d4 gives white an advantage, because on bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, we're going to get almost the same position we just discussed. But what I like less is if knight goes on c6, then Rybka says that white has an advantage. I agree with her. But what I don't agree with is I don't want to go to the position. Well, this is actually quite a bit of an advantage for white, but it's opposite color bishops. White has dark square control, better pawn structure, but it still may not be good enough to win the game. But the other option is knight to e4. Now, knight to e4, centralizing our knight, and after knight c6, possibly going c3, bishop e7, and queen f3, with the idea of bishop f4, for example. And white has good advantage, because when queen moves rook d1, white stands better. The only question is where the advantage is bigger, in queen d4 continuation or knight e4 in this position. That's where you have to make a choice yourself, to go queen d4 or to go knight e4. Actually, you can explore yourself, analyze more, and it's like a personal taste, what you like better to play, this middle game position or the other end game position. In both cases, as I already mentioned, you have some advantage. Now, this is e6 variation with move d5. Now, but d5 is not the forced move in this position. d5 is not the forced move, and so what else can black do besides d5? Besides d5, black can also play b5, which in most cases will transpose to bishop b7 variation in this position. b5, g4, bishop b7, bishop g2, and e6. So it's going to be kind of transposition. So I don't know, we can look at those positions with e6 move, g4, b5, or with b5 and then e6. Either way, we're going to get the same position. After bishop g2, bishop b7, and here white has some choices. White has some choices which way to play. There are two different plans, and what I would recommend strongly is to go here castle. Well, a3 is the most popular move, but I would want to castle here, allowing b4. You see, after b4, the e4 pawn is hanging. So what we do here is we go knight d5. This piece sacrifice was played before and was not that popular, actually played in 1 or 2 games only. E takes d, and bishop e7. Now, what is going on here? White has, black has an extra piece, and it may be very puzzling why white gave the piece. In this position, white has, after bishop e7, black wants to castle next. White has 2 moves. Actually 3 moves, but they can be considered as only 2 because rook e1 followed by knight f5 can be played in any move order. Knight f5 followed by rook e1. So let's look at them. This is one move, rook e1 on knight f5, and the other one is knight c6. Okay, I have a slight preference to rook e1 move or knight f5 move. It's the same move practically because one followed by another. And after knight f5, what we should look for is castle, rook e1, rook e8, and now white has to do something real quick before black develops a b8 knight. So what white does in this position goes g5, knight d7, bishop f4. And now here is the power of this piece sacrifice. So white should get at least 3 pawns, and in most of the cases it's not enough in the middle game. Here white gets 2 pawns only, never gets 3rd pawn, but has more than enough. And it's all on a piece position of the pieces. And I think the position is absolutely fascinating. Here is what happening on bishop f4, bishop f8. Those are the best moves. The other option, only other option is knight e5. But let's look at bishop f8 first. What should white do after bishop f8 is rook takes e8, queen takes e8, bishop takes d6. Taking on d6 is bad because black's b7 bishop is hanging. So a5, that's natural move, preparing knight a6. So after a5, black's position is nearly lost. After bishop takes f8, queen takes f8, and actually this is amazing how it happened. Queen d4. Now queen is glued to f8 square because of mate on g7. g6 cannot be played. So if black continues development. Then after rook e1, you see that black does not have any reasonably good moves. White wants to play rook e7. Rook e7 actually is very powerful. Rook e8 cannot be played because rook takes rook followed by queen g7 mate. So black's position here, according to Rivka, is totally lost. And in my opinion, this is fascinating piece sacrifice. Well, I was taught that when you sacrifice a pawn, you must have compensation, and that can be better pawn structure, activity of the pieces, or positional compensation. But when you sacrifice piece, you better have something very concrete. And this position is really, really bad for black. But now let's go back and analyze black's option, knight to e5. So knight e5 move is the only alternative to bishop f8 move. So let's look at knight e5. Bishop takes e5, d takes c, but hardly anyone will play knight e5 because after d6, in this position, black loses its bishop because bishop on e7 and on b7 are hanging. Bishop f8, bishop takes b7, rook a7, bishop g2. Now this position after queen takes g5 and queen g4, actually we have very interesting position where black may win a pawn, d6 pawn, because they're going to go g6 next move. But after a3, ba, and rook takes a3, white has very good compensation. For example, on bishop takes d6, rook d3, or then rook d1, and bishop c7, rook takes, and rook d1 or bishop c6, and also rook a1 here. White has very good position. That's one of the options the way white can play. Now, so we already mentioned that in this position I suggested knight f5 move, but it's not bad, and you may like even more to play knight c6, queen c7. Actually, this is very potentially very promising continuation for white. Now knight takes e7. Knight must be taken with the king, because if queen takes knight, then rook e1, knight is taken with the king. Now g5, knight d7, rook e1, king d8. King f8 is not as good because of queen e2, king d8, and now queen d4. Well, black has an extra piece. Pawn on g7 is hanging. Black's knight on b8 has no moves. White is going to go bishop f4 next move, and there will be another target on d6. So, in my opinion, white has more than enough for a deficit of a knight. Then two bishops, open file, already have a pawn, and I already can get the second pawn either on b4 or g7, and two bishops. This is very powerful sacrifice, and I think very promising position for white. So now let's go back. So that shows us that in this position, we don't have to play a3. In a huge majority of the games, white played a3. And that's to stop b4. But if we can castle, then to be consistent, black has to go b4 and then knight d5, and we're going to get variations I just demonstrated. So, but if black goes bishop e7, then we can go g5, knight d7, and maybe even f4. And we get typical Sicilian position where I like very much white's chances. So now let's look at a couple of different continuations. But before we go to some other continuations, I want to also give you one option for black that is not successful as well. In this position, we did say that bishop e7 is the best move, and it is best move. However, if black tries to play queen c8, and after rook e1 check, go king d8. Now, what do we do? How do we play this position? You see, now black stopped white's knight c6, and queen e2 does not produce any result because e8 is defended, but position is really bad for black here, because whenever knight will come out to d7, white is going to go knight c6. So the best, just to give you some example of it, c3. Now we want to open more files. B takes c, queen a4. Now you see we reactivated knight c6 threat. Queen a4, and after queen c5, bishop e3, and on c takes b, rook takes b1. Now black has an extra piece and the pawn, but black is absolutely busted here. Position is not defendable, and black will collapse after rook takes b2 and then rook c1. Black will collapse in a few moves. And finally, because before we close this chapter, one other move I want to discuss is queen c7. So on queen c7, what I would recommend is to go rook e1. Now we are intending maybe knight d5 as well, but after bishop e7, we go a4, b4, knight a2, and d5. d5 has to be played because pawn on b4 is hanging, and move like c3 will give white additional squares to disturb position on a queen side. Maybe even c3, and after take, knight takes to c3, followed by knight b5. So after, black should try to defend b4 pawn without giving up the b5 square. After d5, however, now ed, and after knight takes d5, knight takes e6 is way too strong, and after rook takes e6, position is not defendable for black again. The knight is hanging, the bishop g5 threat is coming up, queen e2 is coming, and you can spend a few minutes with any of your computer programs, and you will see that black is going to collapse in a very, very few moves. So that more or less is this is a critical position, I would say, after castling, and black has difficulties handling this position. b4 cannot be played. Queen c7 will be met with rook e1, and continuations like bishop e7. Actually, bishop e7 can be met with e5 as well. And now if black takes the bishop on g2, then e takes f will win material for white. And if black takes the pawn on e5, after bishop takes b7, black is gonna absorb some material losses. So this position, I think, highly favorable for white, and that will close this chapter. So now let's talk about a different move in this position, the move e5. And before we start, let's do the summary of e6. In most of the cases, so we determined that e6 is merging with b5, so we should treat e6 and b5 as one continuation, because after g4 there is no better way to play for black here than e6, and we're gonna get to the position we just analyzed. Now let's go with e5 move. We should go to e2. Black goes bishop e6. That's the move that would make sense. That's why black played e5 and g4. Now here black has thematic d5 continuations, which is very bad for black, because white simply takes, and after knight takes, bishop goes to g2, knight is hanging, must take on c3, and now we exchange queens, take with the knight on c3, and white has very big advantage. They have very powerful bishops, and potentially they're going to play knight d5 check, and they're going to castle on the queen side, and they have big advantage. Even if black manages to play bishop b4, actually on bishop b4 we can even castle short, and we already discussed position type where two bishops and open file b is a big advantage. Not to mention that there is a possibility of going in this position f4, and if black takes, black's king is very vulnerable. And notice that even though the queens are off the board, this position is very far from being considered as endgame position. It's not. For example, on king b6 will be one check, and on king a7 bishop takes c6 followed by checkmate. So this is not a good way to play, and most of the players know it, and d5 is not going to be played. Bishop e7, and that's what we need to discuss. It's the best move. Bishop g2, knight c6, bishop e3, and this is typical way to play for both sides. Now if black castles, white is gonna castle and then go knight g3 and knight f5. So b5 is considered as most popular way to play, and here white should play knight d5 right away. After bishop takes, pawn takes, knight a5 how do we treat this position? And we treat this position like this. So black has very good pawn structure. They have two pawn islands. White has backward pawn, and white is going to go b3 to keep the knight away from c4. But white has an advantage here, and I will explain it. The potentially very weak square is c6 square. So knight potentially may be going knight d4, knight c6. But how are we going to make knight d4? We're going to try to get an attack with f4. And if at any point black takes on f4, we're going to have access to c6 square. So now let's do it not with words but with actions. After b3, castle, and castle on both sides, queen c7. As I mentioned already, white has potential weakness on c2. Queen c7, knight g3, g6, knight f5 has to be prevented, and after g6, a4, b4, queen d2, attacking b4 pawn, rook a b8, and now f4. Now this position I carefully analyzed with Rivka. Rivka says, actually, I thought white was better, but Rivka thinks that white is much better than I thought it was. So that gives serious advantage for white. So if black goes something like rook fc8, we have no problem dealing with it. We can go rook c1, and that's potentially we can go even g5. We may go g5 right away. So this potential threat of rook c1 followed by f5 and knight e4 is very powerful, and black's position is, I should say, very, very suspicious, even here. Okay, so this, this type of positions where we don't have some concrete continuations can be analyzed forever. We can go and show all different kinds of continuations, but nature of position is not going to change. And this position is known as better for white, and some best, well, some this type of positions, basically this type of position. Some best Najdorf variation players, such as Gelfand, he himself lost very painful game with black, and he himself, he's probably one of the best Najdorf players today alive, and he himself avoids those positions for black. White has an advantage here. But what is then what is the best way to play for black? Now, recently, after h3, in some tournaments, and they consider now this as a best continuation, and even Carlsen played just a little while ago, maybe like a week or two ago, g6 continuation. g6, they want, in a way, to show that h3 is a waste of time. Well, after g3, after g6, what I think is white has advantage, and as an example, I'm gonna bring you one game, and there are a lot of ways to play. g4 is one way to play, which I particularly don't like. And what I do like, though, I like bishop e3, and after bishop e3 and bishop g7, queen d2, black white castles, black castles, white castles. We have positions of a dragon with a pawn on a6 instead of e7 and pawn on h3 instead of h2. Now, who this changes favor to? Now, what is more useful move, h3 or a6? And that's the discussion subject for me. I spent quite a bit of time analyzing with Rivka, and I think white has very good advantage here. So in this position, the only way a6 move can be justified if black goes b5, and that's the move. Bishop h6. Now this move was not played that often, but it's the best move and best continuation for black is bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, and e5, knight f3, and there was a game where in black played bishop b7. Now taking on e5 is not going to do much good for white, because probably simple queen e7 will give black normal position. And in the game was knight g5, queen e7, and bishop to d3. Game ended in a draw. White never got anything. You see, the problem that black goes knight d7 followed by rook c8, and white's attack on the king's side is not as effective. Now, this is the position, the key position of the whole variation, and maybe the key position of all h3 system. In this position, according to Rivka and according to my comparison on a few different positions, we came to conclusion the move is h4 and not bishop d3. And we came up with some very fascinating continuations. b4, knight d5, of course, has to be taken with bishop pawn takes on d5, knight b d7, and h5. Of course, we know that h5 does not create really such a great threat, because on hg, black is going to take fg, and it's not going to be that dangerous for black. However, after h5, knight c5, and here knight c5, in order hg, fg, black is covering with a knight e6 square. And here, after rook h4, it's interesting to watch how game develops and how quickly white plays some most unusual way on the king's side. Rook h4. At this point, attacking simply b4 pawn, and rook a b8, king to b1, just prophylactic move, rook f to c8, and the combination that is performed by white leads to a forced win, which is very difficult to see for any human, and I think it's very difficult to assess for any computer program. The combination is bishop takes a6, deflecting black's knight from c5 square. Now, knight takes a6, and this comes to some most incredible continuation. Knight takes h7, knight takes h7, and hg. Now, I want to emphasize again that this variation may be critical for evaluation of all h3 system, because g6 is something that is played lately a lot. And after hg, fg, according to Ripka, loses with queen takes g6, king h8, and I agree that after rook h7, rook c7, although black is going to have more than enough compensation for a queen, there's threatening rook h1 mate. After b3, evaluation of position is as totally lost for black. White has 3 pawns, totally naked king, d6 weakness, b4 weakness, and black's rooks and knight are absolutely out of coordination. So position is lost. The better try may be, another try actually I would say, I don't know if it's better a try, but after hg f5, now that's the move that looks like white is doing okay. Now after gh, king h8, and they may be okay. But here comes the brilliancy that black's knight cannot move because white is going to play queen h8 mate. The continuation is rook d3. Rook d3 is absolutely winning continuation. The threat, real threat, is g takes h. For example, on something like knight c5, g takes h, king h8, rook g3, followed by rook g8 check, and white's king, white's queen and rook will absolutely devastate black's king's position. So black has in this position an option of f4 to keep white's rook away from g3, but after f4, g takes h, king h8, and rook g4, position is totally resignable for black. Because what white is going to do, simply rook h3, and then rook g8. Pawn on h7 cannot be taken because of queen f6, follow that mate next move. And there is no defense from rook g8. And if there is, the rook g8 square cannot be guarded, position should be resignable. And position is resignable. So this is very crucial variation for evaluation of whole system. To summarize g6 variation, after bishop e3, bishop g7, queen d2, castle, castle. I did mention that b5 must be played, otherwise a6 cannot be justified, and h3 can be justified because white will go g4 and f4. So after b5 and bishop h6, there is not much else can be done by black. Move bishop b7 after bishop takes bishop b7, bishop takes g7, and even simply f3, or maybe even bishop d3. it's simply not good position for black, because now white is gonna roll pawns h4 and g4, and it's very hard, if possible at all, for black to find any reasonable counterplay. We could have gone bishop d3, we could have gone queen e3, and either way white has a serious advantage here. That's why black was trying to take on h6 and go e5, and that's how we got that position. So now I have seen number of times, and I remember many years ago this was like a main continuation for black. And it's interesting, I'm talking about e5, knight e2, and h5 move. Now, it's interesting, I have to give you some insights on theoretical novelties recommended by some players, some very good players, some mediocre players, or just some analysts. Every grandmaster, every professional chess player follows these continuations. They assessing it, they keep it in mind. Sometimes they totally go by them, and sometimes they have their own antidote up their sleeve. So h5 was recommended a lot of times, and it was like one of the main continuations. But that was main continuation when h3 was not popular. So white didn't pay really much attention to h5 move, because white didn't pay much attention to h3 move variation. However, h5, I think, simply is big positional mistake. After bishop e6, we can simply go knight d5, or we can go bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, knight d5, and on queen d8, knight c3, bishop e7. Now, let me explain something. We have position a type where white totally controls d5 square, something you can have in a Sveshnikov variation. But in a Sveshnikov variation, black has some counterplay in the center, and here black cannot even castle because of h5 pawn. So white has d5 square for nothing, and they're gonna go bishop c4, and they will completely dominate the board, the center and whole board. So how this was recommended, but by someone who's with h5 mover, it is. So by someone with not such a good positional skills and understanding, and as you can see from the database, there is no good player has ever played h5 in that position. No, but I had to mention it, that there is such a thing as h5, but it cannot be, of course, cannot be taken seriously. h5 idea is to stop g4. Okay, black stops g4, but created number of different weaknesses, and this positionally unsound, bad move, cannot be recommended and cannot be taken seriously. Now let's look at some positions that may not be played exactly the opening the way we want to, but the reason why I want to show them to you, that because those are typical games, typical with a structure, different move orders, but you have to understand and feel this H3 system in order to to appreciate in order to be confident when you play the game to have good results. So the first game, it's between two relatively, actually very strong masters. It was played, and after h3, e5, knight e2, after knight e2, bishop e7, g4, and bishop e6, bishop g2, and b5. Now this is a little inconsistent. Actually, we looked at this type of position, bishop on e6 and b5. If you play b5, you might as well keep bishop on b7 square. So knight g3 and b4. This is a mistake. White would go on d5 anyway, but encouraging white to play knight d5 and losing tempo cannot be unpunished. So ed, bishop d7, and castle. Now this position is clearly better for white. f4 is coming, it's inevitable, and knight on b8 doesn't have really any good squares. So after bishop d7, white castled, black went a5, and white went f4. E takes f, bishop takes f4, and castle for black. Now this position is real bad. White has concentration of the pieces on a king side and big lead in development. Queen e2, and now black wants to exchange dark square bishop. But before you exchange your bishops, you have your pieces, you have to develop them. Somehow they totally neglected. So after bishop g5, queen e3, that's a good move, forcing black to take. Queen takes f4. Now pawn on d6 is hanging, and there is no way to no time to develop. Rook a6 was played. Rook f2. As I mentioned, black is already lost. After rook f2, bishop b5, stopping rook f1 and maybe preparing knight d7. But after bishop b5, knight f5 comes, because bishop left d7 square, and this is very dangerous piece. And after rook e8, white simply won with knight d4, attacking b5 bishop and f7 pawn. There is no defense. After whatever black plays, after queen takes f7, there is a rook f1, the mating track on f8, and knight is coming to e6. Position is quite hopeless. So this is actually a very interesting game because it was typical. That's how black can play against you. You may face player like this. Black hasn't done anything terrible, but played very badly as far as the general plan was. So, and black lost quickly. Now, this next game was played in Chess Olympiad last year. I want to show you this game. I picked this game because it shows you different pawn structure that comes out from the same opening, from the same variation as we just looked, but you see how pawn structures may vary. So let's go with the e4, c5, knight f3, d6. We quickly make standard opening moves. And here, after h3, um, was played e5, knight e2, bishop e7, g4, bishop e6, bishop g2, knight bd7, white castle, and black went b5. Knight g3, rook c8, knight f5. And now I think black should have played some. Actually, they cannot. They don't have any choice here. They have to take on f5 and ef. And after ef, here I think they should have played something like knight b6 to somehow keep control on d5 square. h6 was played, a3, queen c7, bishop e3. Now what can we say about this position? White has total control on light squares on e4, d5. They have most powerful bishops on g2 and e3, and black has no useful plan in this position. After bishop e3, knight b6, queen e2, knight c4. This is all temporary. Bishop retreats and knight will be forced to retreat as well. Bishop c1, queen c5, rook d1. White has very good grip on d5 square. Rook d1, rook d8, knight d5, knight takes d5, rook takes d5. And on queen c7, rook d3. Now black is totally lost here. In the hands of any experienced player, actually any reasonable player, this position is totally lost. White completely dominates diagonal and have potential of creating h4 and g5 attack. So black's position is totally lost. Black castle, white went a4. I don't know if it was necessary, and after b4, b3, and as we expected, after bishop f6, with the idea of skewer and playing e4 and attack both rooks, white played simply rook a2 and knight a5, bishop d2, and white totally dominates the board. Rook b8 was played to protect the pawn. Rook d5, knight c6. Actually, I have to mention that game was played not by such a strong players, but what is important here, it's not to be very strong player to play it correctly, but you have to understand the idea. I think White did a good job studying this opening and understanding this opening. So that's why they played way above its strength, and they played very well. Queen takes a6, rook fd8, queen c4, queen d7, and rook b5. I don't want to go on with this game because at this point position is totally lost for black. They are down a pawn. White has big positional advantage and two powerful bishops. Position is absolutely and unconditionally terrible. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you one interesting move in that black played. It was an experiment, but not very successful one, in the position that we already discussed. So we discussed after a6, h3, e6, g4, d5, ed knight takes, and knight e2. And in this position, instead of normal bishop b4, black played bishop c5. Now, this is not such a great move, and it didn't do black any good at all. So bishop g2, and black's idea was to go knight b4 and create threat to c2 pawn in case white takes. But white correctly took on d8, king takes, and they have very powerful move, bishop g5 check. They're gonna castle no matter what. f6, white castles with the check, king e7, bishop h4, and I've seen a lot of people being fooled in these types of positions with queens of the board. They think the position is it's end game, and they treat it, they said it's okay to be in the middle of the board with the king, but it's not. It's far from end game. There's a lot of firepower still on the board, and black's king vulnerable, and white has big positional advantage on top of it. Rook h1, knight c6, knight f4, and here you see how 6 pieces, they're totally assaulting black's king. Black still played here knight d to e5, and actually white played knight f4, knight d to e5, g5, and after king f7, g takes f, g takes f, and knight e4, bishop e7, knight h5, rook g8 attacking the bishop h1, rook g6, and after f4 you see how every piece is in action, and black lost quickly after rook h6, fe, rook takes h5, bishop takes f6, and bishop takes f6, ef, white has extra pawn, dominating position, all black's pieces stalemated, and black resigned. Was actually very, very good, typical way to play for white if black misplays the opening. Now, next game, I want to tell you that there was game between two very strong grandmasters, was played between Timan and Najdorf. Both are very famous GMs. So g6, and we looked at this variation. We played bishop e3, bishop g7, and one thing we didn't mention here, queen d2, castle, white castles, black goes b5, and white goes bishop h6. We didn't mention what we're going to do on b4, because when I analyzed this position, to me b4 looked so bad that I did not even seriously could analyze this and consider it. However, I was very much surprised when GM of Najdorf's level played b4, and after knight d5, no, actually white took the bishop first, and knight d5, and black went for this pawn. This is very dangerous and very bad. White played simply queen e3, knight f6 has to be played, Now knight takes f6, e takes f, and bishop c4. Now this is so obvious. This is so. If one of my students played this with black, he would really be in trouble by me, you know, because you cannot neglect so much development and go for a pawn, when especially now it's a doubled pawn and such a terrible position. This is total violation of basic principles. After what happened next? Bishop c4, queen a5, rook he1, queen c5, attacking the bishop. It really doesn't do anything. Queen f4, this is indirectly defending the bishop, because on queen takes c4 there will be knight f5 check, winning black's queen. So in this position, after queen f4, rook a7, knight b3, queen g5, and this is like a pitiful picture. Now what happened, black got themselves very weird pawn structure, very weird pieces, minor pieces, and they lost back the extra pawn. That's as bad of a result of the opening as you can possibly have. Black is totally lost here, and they successfully went on losing the game. Now this was very, very instructive as well. So in my opinion, there is no good way for black clearly equalize position or get Sicilian type of position with good chances for counterplay. It's very difficult to get the counterplay, and black has really have to do the homework in order to come up with something, some valuable suggestion. Some of you Sicilian players may ask question, legitimate question, what will happen if black simply continues like they would play Scheveningen, like Scheveningen, regular bishop e7, bishop d7, without g6, without early b5. I have a perfect game played between two grandmasters on a relatively high level, and the game went like this. So g4, bishop e7, g5, knight d7, h4, all very typical moves. Queen c7, h5, b5, and here knight takes c6. Very good move. Queen takes c6, queen d4. And after rook g8, white made very strong move, a4. Black is clearly in trouble now. Well, besides a4, I can suggest another very good move, was approved by Rybka, h6. What is the point of this move? Point of this move is that if black plays g6, white has highly unexpected move queen g7, attacking the rook, and rook cannot capture the queen, because after hg white makes new queen, and they will be up a rook. and the rook has to go to f8, and pawn h7 can be taken right away or after a3 probably to stop b4, and black is simply lost. But on h6 black would have had no choice but taking on h6. Well, anyway, a4 is very powerful move. b4 must be played, because if black takes, white takes back, and now rook c4 is going to come, and position becomes worse and worse. So b4 was played. It's kind of pawn sacrifice where they don't get sufficient compensation. Queen c4, queen a8, and after rook b1, black never got any compensation. Knight e5, queen e2. It was all temporary attack. Queen e2, queen c6, bishop d2. And white has extra pawn for no compensation, and they went on winning the game. Now, I want to give you the summary of all h3 variation. Okay, here is the summary. We play e4 c5, knight f3 d6, d4 cd, knight takes, knight f6, knight c3 a6. Some of you may be afraid of playing h3 because you may say, I don't know that much about it. Well, what you heard now from me in this under 90-minute lecture, that's enough for you to go and play on any level, even on the level above you, because what you have to understand, basic ideas, what you're playing for, basic ideas. Once I mentioned every basic idea there is, and know some variation. Understand positions like this, for example, to understand that this type of position where white has double pawn in endgame and totally ruined pawns, we have 4 pawn islands, and that's not good. But you have to understand this position. You look at this position in a way of potential dynamics, and this position is real bad. You may need more training on how to play this position, how to know them better. And I will be happy to assist on certain variations if you find a way of contacting me, through chessdvds.com. And I will be happy to assist, because I was the only one, maybe, after Fischer, that was really working on it. Maybe Fischer wasn't working on this h3 variation as much. He played just about everything, and h3 was one of them. But I was rigorously playing, and I liked this idea from very beginning. And then I didn't have much followers, and now, after a few decades, now this becomes a very popular continuation, and that makes me very happy. So it's reinstated, some new ideas been input there, and variation now, I should say, gives white